Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1022 has leaked. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. Man, this was an action-packed chapter. We pretty much start off with an update about the differing numbers between the Beast Pirates and the Alliance and how it's closer, and how the Flying Six are defeated. I still don't fully buy this, but I mean, it could go either way, and it's not going to be a big deal. But there's still mystery with Black Maria. I still wonder about Sasaki. Do we really know him all that well? There's also that relationship between Sasaki and Denjiro. I wouldn't be surprised to see Sasaki become an ally. And then, even further than that, you have Who's Who and his ties with Cypher Pole, right? So I expect them to get back up, even if they fight for the good guys. Or just get clowned again by some newly introduced top tier, But if it doesn't happen, I won't miss any sleep. But for a moment, let's just assume, right, that the Flying Six are now defeated. That's what the chapter wants us to believe, so I feel it's pretty fair discussion at this point in time. So assuming, they've played their role in the story, it's over, what do I think about the Flying Six in the story? I think that some of the recent chapters were pretty good. I liked, all the chapters by themselves, I've really enjoyed. Jinbei versus Who's Who was great. Robin versus Black Maria was excellent as well. Frankie versus Sasaki is kind of that normal mid-Frankie fight, but I just like Frankie as a character, so that helps. So the individual fights were actually pretty good. I mean, people complained about Big Mom interfering with ulti, and the page 1 ulti really dynamic, and Usopp. There's lots of complaints about that. I didn't have any issue with it personally, but I would say that my problem with it, now that we're done, is it was just kind of paced weird. I think that, yes, the individual fights in the chapters were good, but it was stretched out for so long that I don't know if I feel rewarded by it if this is the end. I think that's pretty much how I feel, although the anime could take this to another level by filling in details and sort of stretching it out, which I think might actually improve it. But I guess to get really specific here, I feel like the scene that we're missing that would have sort of brought all this together was the crew is here moment. The fights in the chapters themselves were very good, but also a little bit too compact. You finish the chapter, each of the chapters hyped, but then you get this chapter where it's and the Flying Six were defeated, and it's a little underwhelming, at least in my experience. But speaking of individual fights that were short, compact, but I just really, really enjoyed, was Raizo and Fukurokuju. I think Fukurokuju is pretty interesting. I would say that I haven't spent too much time thinking about him. The theory guy, right? I made a whole entire video about Denjiro and some other characters from Wano, but Fukurokuju's just kind of he's just been there for me. So I'm sure that this was probably implied or hinted at some other time, but I hadn't thought too much about it. But essentially it was just straight up stated here that Fukurokuju is an ally to the present Shogun, whoever that is, and doesn't seem to have any sort of moral or ethical sway. Basically, the dialogue exists in this chapter to really help explain what this fight is about. Oda's very, he's OCD, right? And there's a theme to every battle. There's thought put behind it, and he's explaining what the thought behind this fight is. Which is Raizo, we saw this in Zou, is a very emotional guy. And Fukurokuju tells him that that's why you are never a good ninja, you're always wearing your emotions on your sleeves. And they're having a conversation, Raizo's using his techniques. Essentially, Fukurokuju baits him, and that's how he's able to discover him, and that's his justification. Your emotions are a bad thing, and Raizo's no, my emotions are, that's what I'm about. Those feelings, they are the reason we cannot rest. Essentially, those feelings are my motivation, what makes me strong, why I'm still here. And this isn't said, but likely why he and the Alliance will probably win. This has been a recurring theme in the battle in Onigashima. I remember we talked about this when it came to Queens and Kaido's subordinates. The Alliance, they have something to fight for. They have, this battle brings out so much more in them because they care so much more about the results of it. And that isn't just some made up, BS. That's pretty real. So I definitely think that you should anticipate that Oda's going to take this further. I think that there's going to be some sort of genuine or great payoff moment for this concept of we're fighting, not just because we're coerced or because we've picked a side. We're fighting for what we believe in. Defeating Kaido and freeing Wano is the will of the people. That is what they want most. That is their hopes and dreams. But yeah, the other reason I like the Fukurokuju Raizo fight is because Oda is trolling me. Either he's trolling me or we have called the hell out of, Ghost Piece. Like, guys, seriously, it does not get any clearer than this. We are all ghosts hell-bent on fulfilling our master's dream. We are not here merely out of a sense of duty. Every last one of us is fighting because of that emotional bond. Even if it kills us, we won't be able to rest until we have seen this through. Meanwhile, Oda is showing panels of the scabbards, including Kinemon, who is likely dead. We see Shiradoji, who is likely dead, and Kiku, who is likely dead. Even if it kills them, they will not be able to rest until they have seen this through. They are ghosts. All of this, it's either just an elaborate troll of some kind or, we have called this. And I think that Oda might also be setting up part of what will allow the ghosts to appear. It might have something to do with the emotional bond, emotions. I've thought about this a lot, right? With the importance of laughter and joy. Joy is also an emotion, right? So there's something here that's probably going to justify Ghost Piece. That's how I'm reading this. I know that we've talked a lot about Ghost Piece, but I just want to re-emphasize this right now. If Kinemon is just alive, right? After all the lengths that Oda has gone to, or Kinemon, Kiku, Shiradoji, now even the way that he shows this, if they just are alive, right, it's going to be very bad. I think most people, or at least a lot of people, are not going to like that, and I would probably include myself in there. It would feel really cheap, just like fake drama. But if they come back as ghosts, that's a whole different story, and that works, definitely. But it does make me think about everybody else. Have we seen the scabbards who are going to die, or are we going to have more? So it could be that we now know who's basically going to die and who's going to live, or, it could get worse. So I'm curious about that. And obviously we made that theory about Denjiro, which I still like even now, just as a theory, even though it seems so unlikely because the story has moved so far away. But at the very least, I still find myself very curious as to what he will do, because I would say, and I feel like this is fair, he hasn't really done anything since the very, very early stages of the raid for a character that I was pretty excited for. So I hope that something happens. I hope that Denjiro has a moment that I really enjoy, not just as a scabbard, but for himself. After this, Oda transitioned to Killer versus Hawkins, and I don't know what my expectation was before this fight. Actually, that's a lie. I thought Killer would defeat Hawkins because Killer's the ally, and I think that we're at the point in the story where the Kid Pirates, Oda needs to hype them up because they're still going to play a role after Wano, I presume. So it wouldn't make sense to de-hype them any further than maybe he already has. So I kind of expected that, but maybe not to this level. It really feels like Killer just completely owned Basil Hawkins. They're not in the same league, which is it's funny because Killer's the number 2 of the Kid Pirates. But of course, the thing about Hawkins, his devil fruit is what makes him strong, and his ability to have those extra lives. And then on top of that, have that extra life be, as revealed in this chapter, kids. I don't know why I didn't expect that, but now that it happened, it's duh. The stakes of this fight is on another level, and what does Killer do? I mean, personally, I don't think this is gonna happen, but just logical here. It's okay, all right, well, I'm going to capture you now and tie you up so that you can't die. That's what I would try to do. Killers gotta resist the urge to stab. Non-lethal fighting techniques. The other part of me, because Oda pans to Big Mom for a moment, Big Mom versus Kid and Law, right? I was like, does Big Mom really need any help defeating Kid? Why you gotta do that, Oda? The community's been freaking out for literal years, right? Because Big Mom is just this huge convenience to the Struts. But little did you know, Oda was like, well, Basil Hawkins gonna be a huge convenience to Big Mom. But yeah, before we move on, this is just sort of my obligatory question. You know, Basil Hawkins is here. Anytime he comes up, it's like, who's the 1% man? And how would that be relevant to the story? Remember that Basil Hawkins earlier was like, oh, somebody has a 1% chance of surviving tonight. And it's not revealed who this is, but obviously Oda's going to work to sort of explain this at some point in time. The obvious answer is, of course, Luffy. And the way that this story is progressing, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get later, but it's like, there's a lot of good things happening for the Alliance, right? The difference in strength between Kaido and the Alliance, which started off as extreme diff, is now possible. And so, you know, it's like, well, if you were deciding Luffy's chance of death at the start of the fight, right? 1% chance of survival, then now it would be something higher, which is just a Luffy-like accomplishment, right? And this could add to the sort of growing theme that Luffy is the chosen one, essentially. That he's got, you know, he finds a way. Where there's his, and it also sort of adds up with the idea that Luffy never has a 100% chance of dying. He's always got some chance to win. But it's also worth pointing out here that it wasn't a 1% chance to win. It was a 1% chance to survive. So, but there's always the chance that Oda flips it as well. You know, like 1% chance to live, especially with Ghost Piece. You know, somebody important could die. I don't know if it's gonna be, you know, I don't know who it would be, but you know, then somebody surprising dies and shows up as a ghost, and that's who the 1% man was, and that's revealed when they appear as a ghost. That could also be really cool. But yeah, the pacing of this chapter was incredible, and there was still more. Oda then panned to King and Queen, and we find out that King essentially defeated Marco. You know, this was something that I received a lot of pushback about, because I thought this from pretty much the beginning, that Marco would lose to King, and that's what happened. So to all you people out there that said that that wouldn't happen, or that would never happen, take your L. Not only is Marco defeated, but King looks totally fine. So I don't know the exact circumstances. Obviously, Marco was also drained because he was trying to support all of the allies, trying to heal them, things of that nature. So that's important to keep in mind. But, you know, King took care of business. And even at the end of the chapter, right, it's not like Marco's like, all right, it's time for me to, you know, to take over this battle. No, he's like, it's time for me to step aside and allow the new generation to take center stage, which was, by the way, an amazing moment. As soon as I read that, it reminded me of My Hero, by the way, where All Might turns and points to Deku, you're next. But that made me incredibly emotional in kind of a surprising way. Like, I read that and I was like, I felt that moment. So yeah, Sanji and Zoro versus Queen and King, that's something that we expected from the beginning, and then Oda spent all of the raid trying to convince us that that wasn't going to happen until we get to what we thought from the beginning, which is very classic Oda. I think after reading a lot of One Piece, and there is a lot of One Piece, you get a sense of basically how Oda likes to tell his stories, or just his general mindset. It's not 100% accurate, obviously, but you know, it's something that he pretty consistently does. There's moments where, you know, he knows what he wants to do, and he knows what the fans expect, and he gives us what it is that we all know that we want, but only after putting a lot of work in trying to make the reader forget that was the original thought, that just seems so absurdly obvious. I don't think that Oda likes it when what's going to happen is just absurdly obvious. It's particularly when it comes to matchups. So, I mean, that was the whole point. And this could also be a criticism as well, like Sanji. Sanji's just dicking around, doing things like, oh, I'm going to go fight here, I'm going to go fight here. It's like, no, we know you're going to go fight king or queen, right? We know that. But Oda's, he put in a lot of work to try and at every step of this, make people think that Sanji would fight somebody else. And then, of course, Zoro's the same, right? Because Zoro goes up to the roof, which is like, oh, he's going to fight King. No, he's fighting Kaido. Zoro kills Kaido. And then he gets injured, right? So he can't fight King now, right? So it's how his brain works. And I personally like it. Like I said, I was just emotionally hit by Marco's, he's holding his glass. It's time for the stars to take the stage. And then you got the Sanji-Zoro team-up, which is, it's what One Piece fans wanted. From the very start, it's just so obvious. But we spent all this time dicking around, and it really paid off, because you're not sitting there like, okay, when is this going to happen? The story is sort of an entertaining journey to the moment, and it arrives, and it's almost new again. It's not like we've spent the last 2 years expecting it, even though we have, part of our brains haven't. So, it's just, I don't know, it works. At the end of the chapter really worked for me. But yeah, let's not try to get ahead of ourselves. So, in the middle of all of this, we see Nekomamushi attack Perospero. I thought Perospero's line was really interesting, where he's aiming for Sanji, and he says, "Damn beast, I can't see clearly enough through the dust they're making. I'm going to snuff out Vinsmoke Sanji with my own hands, Petalin. If you married Pudding like you were supposed to, we wouldn't have had to join forces with these brutes." There's been times before where I've been on Perospero's side, like when it comes to Carrot, where Perospero says, Pedro blew himself up. Like, in that respect, obviously, he was Pedro's enemy, but Pedro killed himself, and so when Perospero argues that, I'm like, okay, I agree with Perospero more than I do Carrot. Carrot, yes, defeat Perospero, but understand that this is just what it's like to be a pirate. Everybody's fighting for their own ideals, and that's what it's about. But in this case, it's like, if you only married Pudding, then we wouldn't have to join forces with these brutes. It's like, bro, you're a little off base there. It kind of singles out Sanji as important, where I'm more like, well, if only Luffy hadn't come to try and save Sanji, and all sorts of other things as well. And weren't you planning on just killing Sanji anyway, right? So, the whole marriage thing was a sham. If you had just died in Whole Cake Island, we wouldn't have to chase you and have to ally with the Peace Pirates in order to defeat you. You should have died sooner. Is pretty much how I translate that. But it is interesting that Oda chose for Perospero to sort of focus on and direct his anger towards Sanji, and in this way, he did so in kind of a clumsy way, if you ask me, where Perospero's reasoning here is not all that solid, so it feels like Oda's just trying to force this connection upon the story. And so usually when authors do that, it's because they have an ulterior motive, so I think that this is going to have a lot to do with Sanji and Pudding. As just a hypothetical example, right? Perospero is so angry at Sanji. How could you have survived? And then, later finds out, well, Sanji saved everybody. So those two things add up thematically. And you sort of start building that by having Perospero think about Sanji in this small moment, if that makes sense. But we're setting up a Nekomamushi Perospero fight, which was being set up beforehand. And I would say that I like Perospero a lot. And I just hope that we get some adult conversation about Pedro's death. From not Carrot, who's kind of young and immature, but from Nekomamushi, who is not. Where, yes, he's fighting against Perospero with the intent on defeating him, and he doesn't like him. And he may in part, blame him for what happened to Pedro. But, I also want that other half of sort of recognizing that Pedro walked his own path and did what he wanted to, which is, I think, is necessary. The really interesting thing about Nekomamushi going to avenge Pedro is he's not aware of the context of what exactly happened, like Carrot was. But, with his wisdom, if he had actually been there, he might see it somewhat differently. I'm just curious about that. I think that has, for me, a lot of potential enjoyment. I would enjoy that. And also sort of primes us for Ghost, Peace, and Pedro appearing. There's a small conversation between Marco and King, which everybody is talking about, and of course I will too. Marco says, I used to hear rumors about a certain fire-conjuring race that lived on top of the Red Line. King of the Flames, huh? Oda's planning something mind-blowing here. I'm absolutely sure of it. There's been a lot of connections thrown around, like for instance, the sun god Nika has flames for hair, could be of the same race as King. King is supposedly the last of it, by the way. Also I just want to throw in there, because I just do this from time to time over the course of Wano, Grandpa Hio had flame hair too, so I don't know, is this like even the creatures of Wano, right? They have that like sort of like flame. I don't know if it's real flame or not, but it's sort of got that appearance to it. King also has wings, which makes him creature which is really interesting. I kind of, obviously this is a whole lot of, we don't know a lot here, but the Celestial Dragons decided to move on top of the Red Line. Why did they do that? Are they sort of like replacing, the previous gods of the world? Was King's race sort of like, the natural, leadership species? I mean, he's even called King, right? Which would have further meaning if his race was once, the supreme race of the world. You've also got to ask yourself, why are they all dead now? Of course, the Celestial Dragons seem to have it out for any non-human groups, right? So this would actually be really interesting. It's almost like that missing element that it was always there as a possibility, but nobody ever decided to focus on it, right? Was the fishmen went into hiding under the ocean, the minks went into hiding on top of Zoe, the dwarves went into hiding a little bit, the giants are sort of walled off in Elbaf, but like, how many other tribes did the Celestial Dragons just genocide? But it makes more sense to me if this race was sort of put above all the other races at some point in time as well, where you're top dogs, so you're less likely to try and run away. It's a fight to the death, and King's race just lost. It also sorts to continue to build up a theme. It's very interesting actually to think about this, because a lot of the things that we presumed about Kaido are now most likely true about King being the last of his race. We thought that Kaido may be the last dragon at one point in time, but instead, King is sort of the unique race here, the last of his kind that was likely killed. And, it furthers the theme of the Beast Pirates of, they're just out to, not to save the world, but to destroy it, because they're so bitter and about, what's happened. Likely this will be shared by Queen and by Kaido, and in what ways is going to be really interesting. I see Jack as representing the half-breeds. Basically, he's half fishman, half something else, and so you have a home nowhere. You don't belong with the fishmen, and you don't belong with the humans, which can be very isolating and lead to a lot of anger. That makes sense to me, so that's how Jack fits in. Queen is a scientist. I wonder if he's mad for being scapegoated, maybe. It's like somebody like Queen, his expertise, he worked with the Vinsmokes and with Vegapunk in their secret science society or whatever. I just get the impression, this seems like a possibility, like his story would be similar to Caesar's, where they utilize Caesar's genius and his evilness, his desire to create weapons. But as soon as Caesar became inconvenient, you sort of cut him off and then label him a criminal, right? So I think that might be Queen's story, something like that. It's just sort of my interim headcanon for now, where he's just pissed off that it's like, well, you needed me to create all these weapons until, it's just like arbitrarily now I'm the enemy. So you know what? I'm going to continue creating these weapons and use them against you, whatever the consequences. Something like that. King obviously is the last of his race, probably killed by the world government, by the world. Maybe he personally is horribly mutilated. I'm still curious about his outfit. It's also still got an Impel Down feel to it, which is, I'm waiting for the connecting dots there. And then Kaido. What is the reason why Kaido is so mad? Before we thought last of his kind dragon, maybe not now, so I'm sure Oda's got a great story for us. But yeah, I'm pretty sure we speculated this all those years ago when we were originally speculating matchups, right? But it was heavily foreshadowed that Zoro would learn Kinemon's fire cutting technique. And King obviously made a lot of sense in many regards. He's also a sword user. He has fire, so maybe it'll be necessary for Zoro to cut it using that technique that he said that he was interested in with Kinemon. We pinned Zoro versus King from the very beginning, and it's a long ride here, but we're finally here. So now the question is it going to be Sanji and Zoro versus King and Queen? Is this going to separate out into individual fights? How is it going to separate? You know, it's just absurdly obvious, right? Sanji is going to be paired with Queen, and Zoro is going to be paired with King. I hope that this battle continues to take place together, all four of them fighting in sort of a chaotic way. I hope that. But it could work either way. But definitely, thematically, you have the scientist who knows Vinsmoke, Queen. It's going to be matched up with Sanji. The fire guy with the sword is going to be matched up with Zoro. That's how it's going to be. And I am ready for it. There's a lot of intrigue in this fight, aside from Sanji and Zoro being two of the most popular characters in the story. Look, it is my expectation that, just like all the other fights, that Zoro is going to defeat King and Sanji is going to defeat Queen. Zoro stayed after the fight, though, and the extenuating circumstances, like, for instance, the presence of Cypher Pole. I mean, Zoro isn't going to die, I don't think, but, I mean, basically. And then with Sanji, it's more like using the raid suit, utilizing it, proving yourself. I think all of that's going to be really important, and I think what Oda's been building for Sanji's story really is just an acceptance of that he is a Vinsmoke, even if he doesn't like the Vinsmoke, and to sort of embrace it and change what being a Vinsmoke means. Make the Vinsmokes not tyrants and warmongers, but heroes, like maybe they were in the past. But yeah, this chapter was just pure adrenaline. I think that you get that sense just from the pacing that we're going somewhere relatively quickly. Oda's trying to build it. This would be more evident if we weren't waiting week per week for chapter. If you just snowballed, I would say the last 5 chapters, you would really get the sense that Oda is trying to, you know, we've been on the edge of our seats for a while, but it's like especially true right now. Something big is going to happen soon, and I think at least Ghost Peace. You know, I don't know when that'll happen, but that's obviously my theory. It's just curious though how much Oda is throwing this out there. Whoa, the strats are amazing. Hey, curly brows, if we win this, I know it'll finally be in sight. Luffy becoming the king of the pirates. Overall, this has been how the story's feeling over the last 15 chapters, I would say. Aside from when the Scabbards died, of course, which still has not been like officially addressed, mind you, but you know, it's like, oh, the Strats will win. The Strats will win. I will do this. Even Luffy, he's eating his meat, and Oda sets the time frame of, you know, so like Luffy's gonna go fly Momonosuke, maybe Momonosuke as an adult, we'll see, and then have a sort of a last stand against Kaido, and it very much creates the impression of like, hey, you know, they're gonna win this. I guarantee you though, it's going to get heavy, even if that's after they win and Luffy defeats Kaido, or however Kaido is defeated, and everybody else wins. Like, let's just assume that happens, and after that you still have Cypher Pole, and maybe the Marines show up and all sorts of other things. So it's not, you know, that's kind of how I feel about this. Like, I mean, it's going to be tough for the Strats to walk away from this arc feeling like, you know, even if they win, feeling like they've won, which I'm kind of looking forward to, even as it scares me. But yeah, guys, excellent chapter. As always, curious as to what you guys think, whether you know something from the chapter that I might have missed. Just share your thoughts. Like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you disliked the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.